Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan from ProFlex. I'm here with
Chet from TPS.
lovely, and Chet is a movement specialist. Want to everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, just a flexibility coach, mobility, flexibility, also calisthenics, but the whole thing comes together.
Amazing. So yeah, he works with a lot of rehabbers as well in terms of injury management and prevention also.
So this is why we sat down together today, because we want to take it from two angles, from the physio side and also from the mobility side. So where should we start?
Let's start on the normal way to manage injuries or the traditional way to manage injuries.
Okay, let's start with the traditional. So when you were, obviously you're still studying, you just finished, right? Finished. When you were in physio school, what exactly was the protocol from the first onset of an injury, going towards rehabbing it and then eventually getting back to playing the game or whatever sport the person does?
So if we look at it in terms of tissue healing, we've got 4 stages, which is bleeding, inflammation, proliferation, and then remodeling. Those are the early sort of few weeks where we sort of remodel the tissues itself. Well, then obviously once that's happening, and throughout that as well, we're still strengthening. We're focusing on range of movements and mobility. The usual traditional way is a case of let's manage the pain first, then we work on the mobility or the range of movement, then the strength, then into the more dynamic movements, then into return to play. But as you can see straight away with that, you do have a lot of gaps in a sense of, why do we take so long to heal and why does it take so long to recover? Because we're doing one thing at one time. But if we can combine range of movement with strength at the same time, we're hitting 2 birds, 1 stone, and that's how we sort of progress through onto that. And obviously we get onto dynamic stuff, and then onto your plyometrics, then onto return to play specific movements, then eventually returning to play. So it's lots of steps, to be honest, but sometimes the traditional way is we look at things as one block. Well, then the way I work is where I actually raise things at the same time. So imagine you have like a DJ deck. You've got strength, power, flexibility, dynamic mobility there. Rather than focusing on range of movement one time, then strength, I like to work everything up simultaneously at the same time. So by the time you get to about week 6, week 8, where you're ready to return to sport, you've already built all your power, your strength, your range of movement, all that sort of stuff as well.
Right, so we can go into a lot of things there. Let's start off with, let's look at the actual injury itself. We're talking about severe injuries basically with what you've just described, right? So if we're taking someone with a severe injury, that's the protocol to focus on. So what happens if it's someone with just like a general sort of sprain or, sort of soft tissue, minor soft tissue damage, but not anything too significant? How would you take them through the process?
So the first part happens regardless of the sort of injury, in terms of the bleeding phase, the inflammation phase, the proliferation phase, and also the remodeling phase. It's just, the thing is, depending on the severity of the injury, it depends how long each stage of those things happen. But let's take an ankle sprain, for example. A grade 1 ankle sprain, probably able to mobilise it on the day after. A grade 3, probably no chance to mobilise it. So stage 1 looks different to stage 3, and again the principles are the same, but it's just the acceleration of what you do, and you go off feeling, mobility, strength, that sort of stuff as well. As long as there isn't any other things going on in and around, like an ankle is pretty straightforward in terms of the early phases. You want to calm down the swelling, you want to increase the range of movement going throughout, then you want to be able to be strong throughout, then you want to do your single leg calf raises into double leg calf raises into single leg jumps. Single leg jumps change your directional work as well, but also we need to look at what caused it in the first place. Is there anything else going up higher in the chain? Is it because of a weak hip causing a bit of inversion into the knee, and then the ankle to do a little bit more work? So it's a case of we always look at the injury, well I do anyway, so we look at the injury, but also it's a case of why is this tissue overloaded, what isn't working which is supposed to be working, and what is overworking which shouldn't be working. And normally if you hit those two, you find out what is underworking, you find out what's overworking, settle down the nervous system with the overworking muscle, and then stimulate the nervous system with the underworking muscle, and then like balance things out a little bit through there, whilst also focusing obviously on the ankle as well.
So with the mobility side of things, what you just said, I think the attention goes into linking and finding the weak chain. And usually if we're focusing on lower body, the two weak chains are either the ankle or the hip. The knee is the junction where most of the pain or discomfort happens. So, a lot of people come in for ACL injuries and etc. The ACL injuries happen at the knee, but the problem has already come maybe a year before, 2 years before, either in the hip or the ankle. Usually the ankle, because most times when people walk or run, we get minor sprains and strains without realizing it. The body recovers pretty quickly. But what I've seen in the last, I would say, 8 years of doing this is, even for me, and I'll give you an example of a personal experience that happened to me, but what I've seen is ankles are a real pain to try and fully rehab, because as soon as you strain an ankle or you sprain it, the recovery from it, unless you go quite hard with it, as in not at the start, but later on when you're fully recovered, you have to kind of push it quite hard until you get that range of motion back, because getting the range of motion back from what you had before is quite troublesome. And I'll show you the example. So about 5 years ago, I was teaching calisthenics in a martial arts studio, and one of my students came late. So I rushed downstairs whilst the class was going on, and I ran down the stairs, and the steps were concrete, and I missed probably 2 steps and landed on the 3rd step with the ankle fully rolled down. Now, bear in mind, I was training my ankles quite a lot then. So I was doing a lot of ankle rolls. I was also jumping on the ankles as well, plyometric jumps with the ankles, which sounds insane for most of our listeners and viewers, but really conditioning the external rotation and the eversion of the ankle. And I landed on that 2nd step or 3rd step it would be, and I thought, okay, I probably hurt my ankle quite a lot. And it was uncomfortable at that moment in time. A lot of pain went through the ankle joint. And about 3 days later, I was completely back to normal. But the first thing I noticed was the ankle wasn't rolling out as much as it was doing before. So I thought maybe it's going to take about maybe 2-3 months to fully get it back. Even though I was training it every day, it still didn't come back. And it took up to about a year or 2 years before it was kind of coming back. And the second part to this is what I do with that ankle. So if I've injured it, running down the stairs, am I using the ankle enough to have that range of motion back? And I've noticed that with other injuries across the body. If the body doesn't require it, say for example, if you fell down the stairs and you landed in a split, if you don't regularly train the split or those ranges of motion, the body doesn't necessarily want you to get to those ranges again. It sees it as a thing to say, you know what, if this person's hurt himself at the end range, we don't really need this person to actually gain that end range back. What it'll do is it'll shorten that end range for you. So then you have to, if you want that end range, so say you want those splits, you have to push yourself to train for those splits. But generally speaking, yeah, the nervous system kicks in and you are shortened at the end range. And every time you get injured, that end range becomes shorter and shorter. Hamstring injuries, ankle injuries, quads, I don't think quads are too bad. Calves are not too bad as well, but I've noticed with ankles and hamstrings, they tend to be quite
yeah, and also obviously it depends on the severity, because in hamstrings and quads as well, scar tissue forms, well in most tissue, scar tissue forms, and scar tissue is very difficult to get back to the original. So as you said, if you're 100% now, you're spraying it, your maximum healing capacity might be 98%. And if you do it again, 95% and 93, 90%. Yeah. So it's that which is what you're talking about in terms of shortening the muscle length and the end range, yeah.
Yeah, so how would you approach training the end range? So in mobility, what we would do is, let's say 4 weeks down the line, the person's got a strained ankle, but we've already waited 4 weeks for the ankle to heal. We've done a bit of rehab, not too strenuous. And then after the 4th week or 5th week, then we tried to push a bit harder to try and get to the end range. And I had a girl who had, a client of mine actually, she had tendonitis in both on the outside of the tricep tendon and the bicep tendon. And at the start, it was very painful just to do basic stuff like flexion, extension of the elbow. She's a software engineer, so she works at the desk. And just typing was quite aggravating for her elbow. So I waited for about 2 weeks or something, 3 weeks, and we started doing basic rehab. And I used the marker of pain as a thing to use to see whether I was going to push her or not. So I would keep the pain threshold anything up to about an 8. Anything beyond an 8, when it gets to 8, 9, 10, this is when we kind of ease off or switch over to another exercise. For the first, so she was only doing 1 session with me per week. So the first, I would say 4 or 5 weeks, within 1 or 2 sets of doing any exercises, her pain threshold will go right up to about 8 quite quickly. And then I think week 5 to 6, then we can see that we can push it an extra set or extra couple of reps. And we kept doing that until it got to about 2 months or something, and that's when she really started feeling good in the elbow, and we really started pushing. But the thing with recovery is it's never like this. It's always like this. So she was like going through phases where she was feeling good, and then she'll come down again. And then, you know, for her, it was very difficult to go through that experience. And I just said to her, you need to trust this, because this is just how, you know, recovery is. And yeah, it took about 6 months to go from severe tendonitis of both bicep and tricep tendon to complete rehab. I would say she got to about 80-90% of her max, and then after that, the next 6 months was just pushing to get back to the 100% mark. And now she has nothing. So she's fully recovered. So if we're doing that with normal people who've got all the time in the world to recover, how would you now switch that to an athlete who doesn't have that time, because they have to get back to their particular sport that they're playing, for example, footballers, etc.?
So straight away, I would be looking at what's causing the tendonitis into the elbow. Why is the elbow loading so much? Why is the wrist flexors loading so much? Are the wrist flexors below here quite weak? How's the shoulder functioning? How's the shoulder's range of movement? How well does the shoulder move? Because if this isn't moving well, this tends to take over a little bit as well. So I would focus on these two, as well as target obviously the pain within the elbow as well.
Right. So let's talk me through the process. If someone's come in with the tendonitis, how would you, say bicep tendonitis, which is probably the most common one, how would you focus on rehabbing that for the person?
So the first couple of sessions we would look at the first session we look at sort of relieving some pain and some tension. So a little bit of soft tissue, a little bit of pin and stretch to relax the nervous system into the bicep as well. Then now we'll be looking at the shoulder. How well is the shoulder moving? Because also the way the bicep works, you have the short head there, but also the long head, which goes into the shoulder. So we need to look at how well that's moving in there. If this is not loading as well or not moving as well up here, then forces the load to come into here. Same with our fingers as well. Are our fingers working that well efficiently? If they're not, tension builds up more through there. So I'll really be looking at how well the shoulder's moving, how well the bicep is moving obviously, and how well the wrists are moving.
Right.
Even if it's the upper thoracic as well, into the back. Just sort of, as I said, it's a case of what should be working well. If it is working well, it will help reduce the pain in the elbow. Right. And then it's what is overworking, which if it wasn't working, it would reduce some of the pain in the elbow. Right. So then we'll be looking at bicep, then we're looking at some of the wrist flexors, those guys are overworking. So we need to get those two settled down, then get a long head bicep or fingers to work a little bit harder to take a load off elbow. That's where I would sort of see the whole complex, but obviously targeting the bicep, but also looking at, okay, how can we get rid of this problem in total? What's the root of the issue? Right. And then I'll be looking all over the arm and shoulder as well. Okay,
so let's go a little deeper into that. So from the sport that I do, which is mainly climbing, bicep tendonitis is probably the most common. It's not really injury, I would say it's more of a, especially when you start climbing, 1 or 2 sessions, if you do 1 or 2 sessions back to back, you'll feel it straight away. The bicep tendon will flare up. And when I approached it with my friend, we always wondered why people talked about, this pump. In the gym, the pump is a good thing, right? But in the climbing center, you don't want the pump because you don't get as much grip with your hands. So then we were thinking, if the bicep tendon is getting flared up, straight after the pump comes, so it never happens before the pump. The pump comes and then the tendon starts to flare up. So I was thinking, if we can relieve the pump before the flare-up comes in, it must be some sort of link. So what we did was we started massaging each other's forearms. So the inside of the bicep and also the outside. This part was very nervy. The inside wasn't too nervy. This part would give very quickly. The outer part wouldn't give quickly. And I noticed the measurement that we used was, as you stick your knee or something, you can do this yourself, as you stick your knee inside of the bicep, the fingers will start to curl.
Are you sticking it there or there?
This area here. So you put the opposite knee in this area here, and you'll notice the fingers will curl. The more the fingers curl, the softer the bicep will be. Yeah. As the fingers start to curl, you can focus on individual areas of the actual fingers itself. So you'll find that this might curl more than this one. Yeah. So if you stick your knee in there and you keep it longer, and you create like circles and move it side to side, you'll be able to break that tissue down. Then we do the same thing for the outside, but obviously you can't use your own knee, so you need someone else to walk on the forearms. Softer amount of pressure on the outside because the nerves don't really enjoy it. And you'll probably get all sorts of weird sensations, pins and needles, the blood starts to rush out. But we did a lot of work on this part, and if you just feel my forearm. So yeah, we try and keep it, and that's after a climbing session yesterday. I've trained today, and a training session before that, calisthenics. So it's pretty soft. But as soon as we've done that, and then you go back into climbing again, the pump's gone. The tension in the elbow is not as significant as it used to be.
Yeah, because you've offloaded the wrist flexors as well, and the wrist extensors.
So in terms of pressure, a lot of people say you shouldn't put so much pressure because there's nerves and stuff and you might damage them. We would put, for the outside especially, the heel of the person, maybe the toes were lifted on a block, and they would work on just massaging it and breaking down the tissue. And we found that was very, very significant towards just releasing any sort of nerve tension down the arm. And straight away, when we're climbing, you don't overgrip as much. So the theory that we came out was when a person is climbing on the wall and they get an immediate pump, that's because the muscle is pretty much almost maxed out. So let's say you come into a climbing center, right? You've done nothing on your forearms, you just had a couple of wrist stretches, you've gone onto the wall, 2 or 3 climbs into it, if you do some hard climbs with crimps and stuff and pinches, you'll notice that the pump will come very quickly. And that pump is indicating that you are maxing out your muscle already, which for me was never really a good thing. So when we talked to the climbers about it, they never really used any of the methods that we mentioned. So they'd never heard of anyone massaging the forearms or opening the forearms up, stretching them. And yeah, it was baffling. It was baffling. So I just wanted to pick your brain on that. Like, what's the science behind all that?
So the main thing is the neuromuscular connection between the forearms and the brain.
Right.
So oftentimes to protect, our body tenses up and squeezes up. So your brain's telling muscles, okay, don't do too much, or tends to protect. And then all we do with our massage and stuff like that as well, we sort of relax the muscles by telling the brain to the muscle that it's okay, you can lengthen it and relax a little bit. All it is that neuromuscular stimulation it's the efferent signals from tissue to brain back down, because normally it's all afferent where it goes from brain to tissue. And if brain's thinking, oh, I'm in trouble, oh, I'm all tight, and then that's when it tenses up. But now all we're doing is giving another signal from skin tissue to brain saying, okay, you know what, it's okay, you can handle the load a little bit, and then it tends to relax.
Yeah. So that ties in with the apprehension reflex, right? So when a person has done something to injure themselves, and then they try and go back into that sort of movement again, immediately there's a set of panic. Again, we'll use the example of climbing. You've done a route, you've fallen down from that route, hurt yourself badly. 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, you've recovered from that injury, and you're going back into your climbing again. You go back onto that route. Immediately, the fear kicks in straight away because the body remembers, the mind remembers what's happened. So how do you overcome the apprehension reflex, and how does the apprehension reflex affect the tightness of the muscle?
Gradual exposure. So you need to expose the body to the demands of the sport. Let's say if it's football and player A kicked the ball and they pulled the hamstring, you need to reintroduce player A to kicking, but obviously you're going to start off at like a lower level, and you're going to gradually work your way up, whilst at the same time you're reinforcing the confidence behind it, because confidence is a massive factor in terms of recovery. So let's say we're at 25% now, player A is feeling okay, he's doing quite well. You need to almost force player A to remember the things he's doing now, and then as he steps up, remember last session you were able to kick at 75%, do the same thing today, remember how it felt last week and do the same thing again. So it's that gradual exposure to build confidence but also strength. As long as all the boxes are ticked initially, strength, mobility, that sort of stuff there, and the only thing stopping them is confidence, That's when gradual exposure really comes into it.
So that's with someone who, football and sports where you can slowly start to introduce the stuff is quite easy for the gradual exposure. But what happens when you're doing stuff like gymnastics? So let's say you did a backflip and you landed on your head. Now, to go back into overcoming the apprehension reflex, we want to use the same, pretty much as close to the same situation that caused it, but in a controlled way. How would you control a situation where it's a dynamic movement or fast movement?
You would break down the movement. So
Okay.
even if it was a backflip, you would get a box there. You get the gymnast to roll over it
Okay,
and
so
land.
assistance.
Assisted, and then you sort of take away the assistance,
Yeah,
and then you add in the speed, and you run into towards it, and then going into it.
Right.
So you can always shift things back. You need to look at the movement. You look at how can I make this easier, and then expose them to that, and then expose them to that as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what we do when it comes to mobility. But you mentioned confidence before, and that's probably the biggest theme with a lot of these athletes. So when I've trained the footballers, usually during their post-season and lead up to their pre-season, it's all about, I don't feel confident in my body based on an injury, or they just feel very, what was the word that the other player used the other day? He feels like he's claustrophobic in his own body. He feels like there's no space in his body. And I said, do you remember a time where you felt fast? And he said it was a long, long time ago. And bear in mind, these are professional players. So you look at the body, you break it down, and you see tension in the hips. They don't have a good internal rotation, external rotation. That's affecting the ankle, the knee. Upper body is not as dynamic when it comes to rotation of the spine. So when you're moving side to side, switching positions dynamically, it feels a lot sluggish. Now, the brain wants to go faster, but the body's not reacting to it. So what's the process of dealing with that?
So just say the question again.
So imagine a player has come over to you and said, look, I feel like I should be faster, or I should be a lot better than I am right now in terms of movement. Based on their current experience, their body reacts a lot slower than their brain wants them to. Yeah. And a lot of people put that down to age, injury, etc. But how does a person reverse that effect?
So I would look at their whole history, look at the previous injuries. I would assess them on the bed. I'll assess them again, the hips, the knees, how well they're moving through passive, how well they're moving through active. Then any sort of weak links, we would target that. But once those have been targeted, we just need to progress those ones. But also, let's say if they feel slow, sidestepping, what you can do is you can add a resistant band and get them to pull against it, and then you can start incorporating some speed training to it, right. Some fast feet movements to it as well. It's all about mimicking the goal best you can and just exposing to that in the gym, so when they do get out onto the grass, they're able to sort of handle and tolerate it. Right. But again, it's not going to be if it's years of compensation, years of bad habits, you need to sort of undo all those bad habits as well. Yeah. So there will be a strengthening component in there as well, but then also everything we would be doing in the gym would be dynamic. So I don't know if you've seen in my stories, but let's say if I'm doing some hamstring bridges, a lot of people just go up and down. The way I do it is I cause chaos. So I get them to use a plate and then I get them to turn and twist whilst maintaining that hamstring contraction. So that movement in itself, that twisting movement when they're running and turning and sprinting, just obviously more distally into the hamstring, also into adductor mag. So I like to add chaos when I'm doing that sort of work, and then obviously the speed work comes with it as well. But just get as much dynamic movements into those vulnerable positions as you can, and then force them to be able to handle the load. Yeah,
I think the dynamic thing is exactly what we do with the footballers, especially with the lower body. When it comes to kicking and stuff, we do dynamic kicks just so it improves stride length and use of certain muscles. So I notice a lot of people are tight in hamstrings, so their kick, as we practice ourselves downstairs when I've done a session with you, is the measurement is, first of all, you're trying to get your foot, when you kick forward, to shoulder height and then head height eventually. Head height is the minimum. You should be able to kick the height of your head, just so that when you're running, you've got a lot more range. It doesn't mean that you have to use it, but you've got a lot more dynamic range, yeah. And I think if you ever look at not Michael Jordan, what was his name?
Basketball.
No. He was an Olympic runner, gold medalist in 2000.
I know you mean Michael Phillips. Is it Phillips?
I can't remember his name, but basically there's a famous picture.
400 metre runner.
Yes, yeah. Phillips, was it?
Yeah, I think it's Phillips.
I think there's a famous picture of him. We'll have to do our research. Ask ChatGPT. But I'll try and get the picture on when we put this as.
I think I know what you mean, where you're seeing his hip extension.
Yes. So there's a really beautiful picture of him. The camera's focused on him, and then the guy that's second or third behind him. And you look at his striations, and a striation, when you look at it, is an indication that the person is maximally using the muscle, right? His striations are not showing. As in, they are defined, but they're not, you can tell they're not at maximum. The guy behind him, all of his striations are maximum. All his striations are showing, which means that he's right at his maximum. So the difference between Michael and this guy at the back is at his full stride length, he's probably using about 70%. He's probably got a lot more, and he's got a beautiful stride length because his hip is his leg is so far back. Whereas the guy behind him is obviously at 100% with not as much depth in his stride length. So this is why I think dynamic flexibility, but also just working on that end range of motion, trying to improve that, keep pushing that end range. So even though these days mobility, a lot of mobility coaches sell mobility as, doing splits and stuff like that, the fancy stuff, there's a part of that is really useful for athletes as well. You don't need to gain a full front split for a footballer, but if you were near that end range and you were really good at that end range, it'll be great for you, especially for the MMA guys as well. If you're good with your end range of your split, it means that when you're kicking, you've got a lot more whip. And I think whip comes along with momentum. And those two really come together when it comes to, when we're getting that explosive speed. We want to turn directions with, for example, when you're batting in cricket or baseball, it's the whip that you generate from the shoulders that you want, or the torso, that will change whether you're going to strike the ball, 10 meters away or 20 meters away. And the same thing, I think, in dynamic running sports like football and rugby and stuff, is how much whip are you generating in the body to be able to change directions, stop and change directions. But yeah, cool.
What's your thoughts on flexibility versus mobility?
What's your definition of flexibility and mobility?
Mobility would be like contractional length. So the end range where you're able to control.
That's
with,
mobility.
Yeah, mobility with some weight.
And flexibility?
Flexibility would probably be more passive.
Yeah, okay, so I would exactly define as that. So let's do a forward fold, right? Touching your hands onto the ground, keep the legs straight. So what is your end range, first of all? So a lot of people have a lot deeper end range, but they're not using it. Yeah, so they go down passively, and let's say they get their fingers halfway down their shins. If you add a weight or you add some sort of resistant or object that helps them to go down, then they'll be able to go maybe an inch down lower, which means that the difference between your maximum end range and the end range that you can use, that for me is mobility in between that. So if you're able to access or get closer to your end range, your actual end range, it means that you're fully able to use the strength at the end range, which really, for me, that's where the mobility side comes in. The flexibility side is how deep you can go, simple as that. And if we keep it at those terms, I think people will understand it better. But I think with everything that's going on the last 6 years or something, where the whole mobility space is blown up, there's all sorts of different definitions, people selling different things, which is fine. But I think you want to be able to define those two factors, which is, am I training mobility, am I training flexibility? And they go hand in hand. I don't think you can train one without the other. I think you still need parts of both to really try and develop an athlete. And the way I would define it is flexibility and mobility is how strong you are at your end range.
Yeah, I would agree,
Yeah. One thing I wanted to go into is I've been training people from different backgrounds, mainly Africans, African athletes. And I've said this to you before, I've made jokes about it with our guys, which is, as an African person, you should not have this level of tightness, or you shouldn't be this slow. You should be a lot more dynamic. But one thing I've noticed with a lot of Afro-Caribbean athletes is ankles are a big problem. Like your ankle flexibility, but you probably wouldn't even know that because you're not really needing that ankle flexibility until someone points out that maybe you need a bit more range there. So, dorsiflexion, notice that for a lot of Afro-Caribbean has been very, very unusual because they just don't have as much range in the ankle. And when it comes to Asians, as in Oriental Asians, they tend
As in
to be
like more Chinese.
Chinese, Japanese, etc. They develop flexibility a lot quicker. So if I was to train someone who's of that race compared to someone who is black, the speed that these guys will pick it up will be a lot quicker than these guys.
I think that's more cultural though, because if you were to go to Africa, into the villages, where they're still using like the toilets and stuff, where they're squatting down,
Right.
their ankles would be very, very good. I just think it's more now in the Western world, because again, in some parts of China, I would say probably, I mean, I don't know what to say, but like I would say Chinese people who grew up here, they probably wouldn't have the same range of movement as the ones who are back there anyways. So I do think it's more of a cultural thing, because if I was in Africa and I was living there as well, I probably would have better ankles because I'll be using it more and need to use it more.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but the interesting thing about that is we can take it one step further. So how do I get a Oriental Asian person, like a Chinese person, more flexible, and how do I get a black person more flexible? What I've noticed when I've trained both types of people is this person requires a lot more weighted stuff. So if I do weighted exercises, I do strength training basically at the end range here, they respond a lot better than these guys here. These guys, especially like our type of Asians, so it's the subcontinental Asians, if I do anything more than that's required, you'll get either significant amount of DOMs or you end up going a bit too much into the tendons. So there's only so much weight I can do with this individual here. Whereas with you guys, like I've got an example of Ags, he can brute force his hamstrings into that position and just go all out, and he'll never have to worry about having problems in the you know, damaging the tendons, etc., or damaging the fibers. I've noticed that as a big factor as well.
So would you say that there's probably stronger hamstrings but unable to reach the range, and then more flexible hamstrings, but as soon as you get to that end range, it's a bit painful?
Yeah, I would say it's probably that is the biggest factor there. And
why is that? I'm not too sure. I think it's just obviously genetics play a part of it.
I just think it's, you know how when you get yourself into a swimming pool, don't do anything, just sit still. What happens? You sink. I think your bones are more dense. I think the muscles are more dense. So you have a different type of, I think it's the thickness of your fibers, which is why when you guys do activities such as basketball, etc., anything that's explosive, you guys dominate. You know, whereas those guys, they dominate with long enduring type of sports.
Okay, I know what I mean, yeah.
But there's a big genetic factor. But what's really interesting is as we approach this next millennia and there's more people that are mixing together, how does that affect people? So I've got...
in terms of interracial couples?
Yeah, like what side do they lean towards? So Ags' niece, who's mixed race, her mother's white and her father's obviously black. And I've noticed that she has a really weird thing in her body where if she trains the muscle, she'll gain the flexibility and she'll maintain the flexibility. As soon as she stops, she loses it. Now, that trait I've seen in a lot of African guys.
I would say it's the same as well.
Same with you, right? Yeah. But whereas with the Asians or the white guys, they don't have to worry about that. So they'll maintain that flexibility a lot more. So I can ask you, like, how many black girls do you know that can do full splits? Or that do gymnastics that can do full splits? If you ask them, there probably are, because Ags' niece was doing gymnastics, but she said it was never 100%, and it would take her a lot longer for her to get to that depth, whereas the other guys in class they'll find it easy. So she would have to work extra hard to do that. But the trade-off is, on the other side, is she'd be a lot more explosive when she was doing the movements. So she wouldn't need that range of motion as much. So that's why I think a lot of Africans haven't really thought about their ankles, because they don't. Like the guys that I've trained that do football downstairs, there's a guy that pretty much had less than 90 degrees of range of motion in his ankle, and yet he was able to touch a girder downstairs, which is probably about 15 foot off the ground.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, so it's obviously compensation in it. We're able to figure out other ways to achieve the tasks.
Yeah. So
up until they get injured with the ankles, and then it's okay. Now we need to look at the ankles.
Exactly, and then when you look at the ankles and you think, wait a second, something's wrong with this ankle. It shouldn't have that lack of range of motion. Then you realise, actually, you ask the person, and no, I've always had this. Yeah. So it's like, what's going on here? And I think that for me, for the next 2-3 years, is to create a protocol which says this is what the default level of flexibility should be. You know, when I was doing the ankle stuff with you, you were surprised how painful the muscles around the ankle were. It's because that level of flexibility, again, we're not using it, but we don't know what the default should be. So when you go over to train with a mobility coach, he's saying, this is what you should be with your ankle, then you realize actually, yeah, I should probably be working on my ankle more because of this problem. Shin splints and all that, that would probably disappear if we can focus on these kind of things. But going back to what I was saying about the differences, it's absolutely fascinating because if you're able to achieve that height with your vertical jump on that lack of use of the ankle joint, imagine if we improve it by 10, 15 degrees more. You'll be unstoppable. And this is what goes back to that Michael Phillips, was that his name?
Yeah.
His stride length was a lot more because obviously he's either got the genetics where he's been working on it, or he's gone off with a coach and someone said, maybe you should improve this a lot more. And that's given him that extra edge, which has allowed him to come gold in the Olympics. But yeah, fascinating stuff.
Interesting.
When does mobility become a hindrance, would you say? So if I say to you, Jonathan, like I'm focusing on this and I'm doing this, at what point do you turn around and say, maybe you're going a bit too hard with that, maybe you need to focus more on the strength aspect of things?
When I'm working with hypermobile people.
Okay, cool.
I would say.
Let's go into that topic then.
Yeah, hypermobile. And then often you find out they're not strong in those end ranges of motion, but they can get there, but in terms of strength and ability to control it really, really well, they struggle. So at that point, it's a case, it'll be more loaded flexibility, so mobility work rather than just pure stretching.
Yeah, I think the flexibility part of that, the pure stretching, the passive stretching, they usually are good at that because they've got joints that are a lot more mobile. And there's a more focus towards strength at the end range. But one thing I've noticed, I think I said it to you, I don't know if it was you or someone else, where I said you actually have hypermobile knees.
Oh yeah, you told me, yeah.
You, right? It was you, I said it to you. Even though you would
I
never...
was seeing it, I was looking in the mirror, I was like, you know what? Yeah, but then my calves are rock hard.
That's why the calves are rock hard. Every single person that I've met that's got hypermobile knees, the calves are usually the ones that take the load. I had a girl a few years ago, she was Mexican, Tanya, and she's probably the first person I ever met that was like this, and which made me think deeper about hypermobility. So she came to see me, and we were just doing calisthenics, and we'll do one session calisthenics, one session mobility. And she had the most insane flexibility in her hamstrings. Like when she would do a forward fold, she'd be all the way down, hands all the way down to the ground, hands for the back towards the heels. Yet she would always complain about her calves being tight. And I didn't really understand it. I was like, how can you have such depth in your hamstrings, yet complain about your calves? And she was someone that would walk her dog up hills and stuff towards Wilmslow. So then I looked at her and did the stretch against the door frame, and her calves were so tight that she just had these clumps in her calves. So we broke that down. She had the most agonizing session because I was breaking down with my hands and walking on it, and it finally gave. And then we noticed that her knees were fully locked out, and there was this almost like a U shape. And that's what the first time I noticed that people with tight calves usually have probably got some sort of hypermobility in the knee. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's genetic. I think you can also develop it as well. So if your calves are getting way too tight, something has to give. And usually for a lot of people, the hamstring gives. The back of the hamstring, the lower part of the hamstring gives. And I've noticed that in myself when I'm doing rings. Like I've developed hyperextension in my elbows from doing gymnastics rings, just doing the supports and also doing handstands. So if your elbows are fully locked out doing handstands, you're not really recruiting muscles. You're just kind of stacking the joints on top of each other. The same as the rings. If you lock out the elbows, you get a lot more use of the bicep. So when you're training someone who's hypermobile and you're diagnosing these little things, how would you go about training someone that's extremely hypermobile, where the joints just kind of pop out and stuff? Because I've had a person like that a few years ago.
Where the joints pop out?
As in, she's had cases where...
Dislocation of the...
Partial dislocations, yeah.
Okay, due to hypermobility. If we're looking at more of the strength around the rotator cuff, again, if the range is brilliant, absolutely fine, but are they strong in all those ranges of movements? So I would look for the weakest plane of movement, and then I would retrain it. But then adding load, by adding some more dynamic stuff to it as well, whether it's push up with a catch or two hands to one hand, sort of testing the stability as well as the strength as well. So I would obviously be keeping an eye on the range of movement, but the main thing is building strength around the shoulder. Because most likely they wouldn't be as strong as they should be in and around the shoulder if it's popping out of place. ultimately.
So what would you say, that's the physical part, right? What about the nervous system? How does the nervous system tie into someone's hypermobility? What's the nervous system saying to the individual?
To the hypermobile part or the tight part?
To both, I guess.
Okay. I guess to the hypermobile part, it'll be a case of there are no like alarm bells ringing, in a sense. So then like it's free to do whatever it wants, and then to the tight part, it's obviously stressing it out a little bit in terms of why it is relaxed. I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm not too sure why.
Let's try and go delve into this and see if we can pick something.
Why hypermobile people hyper?
Yeah, like why? Some people say, I'm genetically born like this. I've got a friend of mine who can do weird stuff with his fingers.
A lot of it is the nervous system though, because it's like if the nervous system's tight, your muscles tight.
Yeah.
And the only way to relax a muscle is to relax the nervous system.
Yeah.
So why those people who are hypermobile ultra relaxed?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's a good question.
Ultra relaxed in certain parts of the body.
In certain parts of the body.
We mentioned the example of the knee. The calf is super tight, yet the hamstrings are fully relaxed. But that nervous system conversation is very, very interesting, because what does it mean to be relaxed? It's probably going to go into a bit more philosophy as well, because I think a person, when I say relaxation to you, what does that mean to you?
It can mean a lot of things, but in terms of like physio point of view, it's the ability to let go of that muscle.
Okay, so soften the muscle, right?
Just to soften the muscle.
Okay, so is there any measurement that you use to determine if a person is fully relaxed or not?
It's not so much measure, but it's feeling. So, for example, a lot of my back pain patients, the first thing they are when they come in, they're uptight. They don't know how to let go of this lower back.
Yeah.
So the first thing I do with them is I get them on the bed, I get them to close their eyes, hands on the diaphragm, and just allow them to breathe and relax that lower back. And then as soon as they get up, straight away they're not like a rocket. They're straight away more relaxed. And then same once they're seated up, it's the breath work. It's a deep breath in. Then as you breathe out, you force them to sink in to this lower back, and then that forces the nervous system to relax, and then also the muscles there to relax as well.
Okay.
So a lot of it is breath work, and it's a lot of feeling and listening to how the body's responding, and also you can sort of see it as well in the patients.
Going by, because you're obviously rounding it back, which probably sounds a lot weird for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's it. Everyone's been taught to sit up straight, but actually, if you're constantly straight, imagine you're holding a fist constantly for hours and hours and hours. What happens to your arm? This gets tight, your shoulder gets tight. Sometimes when we get therapy in our back, this is what happens. So everything around our back is like this. Second we do, we can sort of settle down the whole back a little bit as well, and relax the nervous system.
So would you say the breath work comes first, or the stretching?
Breath work.
So if I reverse it,
I can do both.
Yeah, if I reverse it, let's see what you think about this. So I've got a theory, and I've done it on a few people and myself, that if people are always hunched over, we normally say that the muscles of the lower back are, a bit tight, so we get them to, if they keep the back straight, we think the muscles are contracted, so we get them to round their back, right? Now, if a person's hunched over, what do you do then? Because the muscles are pretty much in the lower back are kind of stretched because they're always rounding their back. So then what else is tight there?
So this is like the first instance when you see them, you sort of settle them down in the first session in terms of the nervous system.
Right.
But if they are constantly hunched over, then it's a case of this might be a little bit tight into there. Now we need to look at releasing the core a little bit and the abs a little bit, the rectus abdominis. And then also you're looking at chest as well, So you need to look at everything which is making them round. And then, like I said at the start, you need to, if an area was working properly, what would happen and what would the outcome be of that? So there isn't a perfect posture. I know people like to be like this or like that. The perfect posture is the one where you're not in pain for one and constantly moving.
Yeah.
So you're not in one place 100%. For too long.
100%. I think I fully agree with that. I think there's been this thing for so many years to say you need to keep your back straight.
But if you're like that the whole day, what happens?
yeah. I had a girl years ago, just around lockdown, and she was a horse rider. And this is a very interesting point because I noticed the same thing with a lot of horse riders. With horse riding, you have to stay upright, right? And some people, when they horse ride, if they don't stretch the hip muscle out, because the hip muscle is getting tight based on the width of the horse sitting on the saddle. Yes. So when you horse ride, if you've ever been, this is the area that gets really uncomfortable the next day. You get the DOMs there. So a person that horse rides, unless they are got a side sport, so let's say they do gymnastics or something, so they're stretching all the time. A lot of the young kids, girls mainly, when they grow up, they're horse riding with their back straight. Now, if they're not stretching the hip muscles out, and mainly the iliacus, what happens is they end up extending from the lumbar spine and not actually rolling the hip forward, tilting the hip forward. So they get a lot of tension in the lower back. So, you know, remember Permin? Do you ever meet Permin?
Yeah.
Permin's missus, when she was here, Emily, she had this chronic issue in her lower back. And I noticed the position of her spine, the posture of her spine was very similar to a previous client I had. And I said to her, do you horse ride? And I said, have you horse ridden when you were a child? She goes, yeah, how do you know? I said, you've got the same posture, the spine that another person.
So what did you see in the spine there?
So let me get this right. So the top part of the spine, they can extend the top part of the spine, but there's always a curvature to the lumbar spine, as in a rounding of the lumbar spine, which is the other way around usually.
So it was kyphotic and then lordotic. So lordotic is where you come up.
No, the other way. So the kyphotic at the bottom and...
okay, like a big S.
Yeah, but it's like ours is the opposite. Ours is usually, well, most people is usually kyphotic at the top and then a massive arch in the lower back. So it's more like this, right?
Yeah, I'm quite. I have quite a lot of lordos actually in my back, so I'm like that.
You're curving at the lower back more, so just like a horse rider, basically, really. So that was the first part, and then what I did was I've got him into a cat-cow position with a band attached to. If you're doing it on your own, a band across the body. So you place the band around your hand, put the band across you, and you're pushing the muscles up towards the ceiling when you do the cat pose, where the band is in contact with your body. If you have a partner, it's a lot easier. So you point out different points on the spine. So you start with the cervical, you go towards the thoracic, and you go all the way down to the lumbar until you get to the sacrum. And you get them to really push the muscles up towards the ceiling in the cat pose. And you'll see how much they'll struggle. Like they'll feel like everything is cramping as they're doing it. And as you get towards the halfway point of the spine, as you go towards the lower part of the body, you get them to tuck posterior pelvic tilt, the pelvis under more and more. And a lot of people, even one of my massage friends, Craig, he started cramping in the abs. And I was like, okay, there's a point of tension here where the abs, if they're cramping here and you're not able to fully round, you're not getting the most out of that posture. So we stretch, as you said earlier, you stretch the abs out, you do exercises that extend the spine and really stretch these muscles out here. And straight away, he was able to go into more of a rounding posture. So the conclusion here is even people that round all day are not that great at rounding because they're stuck at a certain range of motion of the rounding posture. You need the opposite muscles to be able to round further. You need those muscles to be strong and you need these muscles to be able to relax more by having the opposite muscles being strong.
That's it. The back needs to lengthen, the inside needs to shorten.
So what I usually do is I work in pairs. So we do an exercise that extends the spine, an exercise that rounds the spine. And just by doing that, usually this kind of movement loosens up joints and muscles a lot quicker. But what was the point we were talking about?
We're talking about why hypermobile people mobile. Or was that before?
No, that was before. This was about something else we've got. Because I was trying to bring it back to that, what we were talking about. Relaxation. Relaxation. How do you measure a person that's relaxed?
Yeah, how do you measure a person who's relaxed?
So once you've done that and the belly becomes soft, that's your indication. So you use the belly as an indication to say, okay, if I'm holding on tension right now, as I'm speaking right now, my abs are slightly contracted, so I'm not fully relaxed. But if I become quiet, the softness of the belly is my measurement. So whatever exercise I'm doing, when I'm putting you into a couch quad stretch against the wall, use the belly as a measurement to see whether you're relaxed. If the belly is soft and if you can consciously bring your attention to the belly and let it soften, then usually the depth of your breath becomes greater. So we were saying, what comes first? Like, would you use breathing to relax the belly or would you use stretches to help you breathe better? And I think that was the approach I took. So people that are extremely tight have never really experienced relaxations fully because of their job or whatever their life is. Get them to focus more on their belly, stretch that muscle out, then focus entirely on the belly when you're doing other parts of your body. So if you're stretching your quads out, your hamstrings out, is my belly soft enough? If it's not soft, then usually on the RPE index, you might be going towards an 8.
So you would go for stretch over breath?
Depends on the individual. So if we're going back to that, the race thing, you know, you've got the Chinese person that's softer, usually then we can use the breath. If the black person is tighter, but sometimes, you know, it's the other way around as well. Like this guy is softer. But what usually I find is if someone's got muscle tonus, you know, the muscles have got striations, you're not fully relaxed. Yeah. You know, in the Western world, we're trying to get our bodies to look defined all the time, but that's not how it should be. Yeah. If you look at a cat, and I always use this example, if you pick up a cat that's really soft and likes you, all the muscles will be relaxed. It feels like jelly almost. As soon as it gets annoyed at you when you picked it up, all the muscles come out and you can feel the striations. And you know, those cats that, I think it's the Egyptian species where it has no fur, you can literally see it. You can see the muscle, it just looks like rubber when it's soft. And as soon as it gets angry and everything flares up, all the muscles come out. We should be the same. I think as an athlete, you should have the definition of your muscle. So my deltoids, you should be able to see the separation between my deltoids and my triceps. Fine. But I don't think the striations should always fully show. Again, genetics, fat percentage all come into this. Like, you know, I wouldn't expect you to be fully, I can't say that you're not fully relaxed because I can see your muscles because obviously your genetics, but that's a really good indication. Why would a person want that? Well, if your muscle is always constantly under tension, you're not getting the maximum out of it. You know?
Same way with the making a constant fist.
Yeah, you want to keep fully relaxed for 99% of your life, unless you're using the muscle. If you're walking around, fine. But if you're doing stuff, only those specific muscles should be contracted, and whatever's in the chain. But why is your hip muscle contracting when you're sat at a desk? Yeah. You know what I mean? It's contracted because you're sat like this all the time. So if we get into the postures that allow us to fully relax that muscle, then we're going to have less tension in life, which means when I'm seeing you on the table, it's easier for the physio to break that down, and it's easier for the individual to feel more like I'm getting more out of my session. Yeah. So how would you, if you've got someone who's extremely tight and doesn't know how to relax, you said you use the breath to try and bring them back.
Yeah, obviously it's individualized. It works better with women in general anyways, to be honest, the breath work. So then I'll just look to the mobility. I'll try and increase range through the motion as well. Yeah. But obviously with some sort of weight and control through it. So let's say it's hip flexor stretch, rather than them just passively leaning forward, I get a weight in them and just allow them to go gentle and control it the whole way through and back up again. Right. That weight itself, it's that eccentric lengthening, naturally helps relax the nerve system as well.
Yeah, PNF usually does a job as well, where you contract the muscle at a much stronger rate, and then you relax it, and immediately it tricks the brain into thinking the next
nervous system.
Yeah, it's crazy, absolutely insane how.
Yeah, I do a lot of pin and stretch as well. So it's like I'll pin the hamstring. Let's say this is the hamstring here. Yeah. I would pin it here, slide up, and then I'll extend it and lengthen. Right. Just pin, stretch, extend and lengthen. Yeah. That one does really well as well.
Have you ever done, so in a way you're doing partner stretching. When you're assisting the individual to contract and relax, you're doing a form of partner stretching. There's a whole protocol, a whole industry which involves partner stretching, which is absolutely amazing. Like I've done it for 3 or 4 years, and I do it with a few clients of mine, especially when you're extremely tight in a specific area. You want some sort of load, but you don't want your own individual load. You want to make sure someone else is applying that load onto you, which means that your muscles can relax. For example, when we're forcing the lengthening of the hamstring, you can put a person in position that he doesn't feel like he has to contract that end range for him to relax at the end range. Because usually, if you get close to your end range, we're going to that 8, 9, we never get to 10, but we get to that 8, 9 range, and it becomes extremely excruciating to fully relax. And again, the definition of pain becomes a very important thing there, because for most people, they can't separate the difference between pain and tightness, or what's the difference? Yeah, and what's the other one? That's just discomfort. I think pain and discomfort. Those are the two main intertwining things. You know, if I stab you with a knife, that's pain. That's one form of pain. But if I get into a stretch and I get it to 9 out of 10, that feels like pain. Your brain registers it as pain, but it's whether you can tell your body that actually it's not pain, it's just apprehension, it's just tightness, you know, sorry, not apprehension, it's just discomfort, a large amount of discomfort. So, you know, I try and get the guys that I'm training to understand what the difference between a 7 and 8.
It's a key part as well. Yeah. We're having pain and discomfort.
Yeah.
Understanding, is this the same feeling you felt when you injured it?
Yeah.
That means we're doing too much, or is it more of a, okay, it feels like a nice stretch.
Yes.
I feel it working, I feel it burning.
So
Nice differentiation between the two.
Yeah. So with what you're saying there, what's your take on passive flexibility?
Passive.
It's like, should you do it? Should you not do it? If you're doing it, what's the
I
reasons?
would prioritize, let's say you have 50 minutes, I'll prioritize mobility.
Okay.
So let's say you are an athlete, you're focusing on your gym, your shove, your sprint work, your power work. Rather than doing passive and mobility, I would go straight to mobility and just strengthen through the whole range of movement.
Right.
So you're still stretching it,
Yeah.
but it's not just for the sake of doing it. That's my take on it.
Okay. So
If your time stamp, but obviously women enjoy, well, not just women, but everyone sometimes enjoy just stretching it out,
yeah.
which is
Yeah,
fine and
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
But let's say I've got 5 minutes to try and get warm. I would rather do loaded hip flexor movements than just do passive.
Okay, so I'm going to try and throw that theory out the window, just from personal experience. And it does tie into exactly what you're saying, because I'll come back to the mobility stuff, because I use mobility warm-up. But there's a time in my life where I was doing passive stretching, because I didn't understand dynamic flexibility, ballistic flexibility, all these different protocols. At the time in 2014, I just understood stretching as stretching, passive flexibility. So I learned a 10-minute stretch for my quads, which felt tight. And then as time went on, I built it up to 20 minutes, 30 minutes. At one point, I was stretching 30 minutes before a heavy leg session. And I kid you not, I never had any injuries then. So I would go in there, stretch my quads out to, when I say max, it's not the 10 out of 10 in the RP index. I'm talking about maybe 8 out of 10. Yeah, to a point where I can handle it. So 7 out of 10, 7 feels comfortable, like it's bearable. 8 becomes a bit more uncomfortable, but usually nothing past that. I would do that for half an hour, and then I would go downstairs and I would do reverse pyramids, which is basically you do the heaviest weight first, then you work on the lighter weight, because I felt at that time, I didn't want to fight fatigue. As you gain more fatigue and you start increasing the weight, it puts more stress on the body. So I would do the heaviest weight first. And it was crazy because people that were around me, my training partners, would say, you're insane. You just stretched for like half an hour upstairs, you're coming downstairs, now you're going to do a heavy leg session. And I used to say to them, I used to have no problem. As soon as I reversed it, went back to normal pyramid sets where you start with a lighter weight as a warm-up and you work your way to a heavier weight. And I didn't do as much passive flexibility in my session at the start. And that's when the niggles and issues would come then.
Yeah. So that just tells me it's more of a, obviously you're feeling much fresher to begin with to hit those heavier weights, and then as you come down, you're reducing the weight as you come down anyways.
But that explains the pyramid, right? What about the fact that I'm doing it as a passive? I feel like passive flexibility at the start of the session benefited me more than actually doing a dynamic.
Do you feel like if you've done a 30-minute mobility one, would you have had the same impact or no?
I've done both.
You done both?
And
okay.
I'll be honest.
What, for half an hour as well?
Yeah, for half an hour. Okay. And it was not the same. But it's, I'm being biased here because I'm not saying that a weightlifter that's competing should do a half an hour passive stretch, because obviously your goal is to lift as heavy as possible. My goal in there is to lift as heavy as I need to, as in terms of the training plan I'm on, but I'm never going to 100%. Yeah. So when you look at the one rep max, I'm nowhere near my 1 rep max. On my 3-2-1 program, the Wendler program, my 1 rep max is set at 90%. So even when I get to my 1 rep max, I'm not going to 1 rep max. So
I guess then again, it's the goal and outcome.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then also it's because imagine asking a footballer to stretch passively for 30 minutes whilst doing the activation, whilst doing all the warm-up stuff before. It just doesn't fit in with the schedule.
I might try it out. One of the guys, because I think there's a theory here that
it makes sense, because obviously I think for me it's a time element in it.
Yeah.
That's probably the only thing. It works. Obviously stretching works. To get everything warmed up nice and easy, because I stretch as well. But I guess the application to the wider population.
So there's one question higher than that. So then what is the purpose of passive flexibility? Okay, for relaxation, right? It allows you to feel good, chilled about yourself. Fine, everyone knows that part. But I don't think people know the second part of it, which is, when does a flexibility movement become from muscular to just a movement pattern? you see what I mean? So when I stretch your hamstrings out, right? When does the hamstring, let's use a squat as an example. When you do a squat, you're feeling all this tension in your body. And when you go down into a squat, you can feel the tension easing off and releasing, right? So it feels good for you. So for you, a squat is a good movement to warm up when you're doing like any sort of, let's say a leg day. So you're doing like dynamic bounces in your squat, you're moving side to side. For me, a squat is a movement pattern. So when I squat down arse to grass, it's not even a stretch, it's a movement pattern. So my question to you is, when does a muscular exercise become a movement pattern?
Movement pattern defined as you not feel anything.
Yeah, scratch your ear right now.
Yeah.
That's a movement pattern.
Yeah.
What you've just done there is exactly what I experience when I'm doing that. There is no sensation. Yeah, ankles are probably a little tight today, so I feel that.
You complete the game.
What's that?
You complete the game.
No, but this is what I mean. I think this is the key component of passive flexibility. I think that's what it does. So let's say I want you to get to this stage where the squat for you is a movement pattern. How do I get you there? I can force you in there by doing mobility stuff, but mobility requires some sort of loading of the body. Yeah. Now, a movement pattern only becomes a movement pattern when you're fully relaxed, when the brain is no longer using its capacity to go into that movement, when the nervous system is no longer kicking in. We're going into some deep theory here. But basically, for me to get you into a squat, I need to make sure that your ankles are that good, at least that range where when you're going into a deep squat, it feels like it's effortless. The same as every part of your body. So this is where that passive flexibility comes in, because no other exercise will get you there. Okay. You need
in terms of holding in those positions, yeah, I would agree as well.
Because the passive flexibility, what it allows you to do is become soft. And softness means you're relaxed. And if you're relaxed, it means that the body has no tension. And if the body has no tension, you've got the movement pattern. Yeah. So when you're even as crazy as a backflip, right? For someone who does a backflip, if they've done thousands of backflip over the years, it's just no different than you and I scratching our ear, just at an advanced level. The same as when I'm doing the crazy jumps off the plyometric boxes, when I'm spinning around and stuff. For me, there's no tension there because the body's fully relaxed. For a person who's never done that before, or a person that's jumping for a ball, if you've never jumped for a ball when you're catching it, that becomes a movement they have to think about, then it becomes a nervous system thing.
Yeah, we call that top-down thinking, where your brain controls your movement, but it should just be your feet control the movement. So, and like that's where we bridge the gap between return to play and sort of the NSAID rehab. So let's say for a footballer, he shouldn't be thinking about kicking the ball. Right. He should just do it and feel nothing. He shouldn't be thinking about sprinting or am I loading my hamstrings well. He should just be able to do it without even thinking. Same way with turning, he should be able to snap, turn, pop off without even thinking, whilst focusing on the ball or focusing on like a ball to catch. So it's that training where you train it so it doesn't become a thought, just it works its way up rather than brain down. Right. So
you're switching off your nervous system in a way.
That's it, switch off the nervous system. So rather than going brain, spinal cord to legs, it's legs to spinal cord and back down.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's where passive flexibility comes in. Yeah. So that final piece of the puzzle is passive flexibility. Even though the puzzle, you don't need to use it at the end, you can use it throughout your process. So if I'm training you and you want to get good at your squat,
I would say, well, it depends on the goal. For like, I talk about football a lot because I've come from a football background. But if, let's say, the hamstring was injured through sprinting, I wouldn't get them to go into squat. It's because I would expose them to the thing which made them as close as possible, even if not further, with the thing which caused them injury. Right. And that's how we can help the nervous system relax as well in the confidence building. Okay. So we want to retrain it to a bottom-up thinking. And with that, we use cues rather than just sprinting. It's a case of, let's say, left cone, right cone, run behind. So they're just listen to the voice rather than thinking about how well the legs are moving.
So you're saying that the person's got a hamstring injury, you're using
in terms of the final piece of the puzzle. Yeah. As you said, the final piece of the puzzle.
Right. So you would do dynamic exercises for them to change directions without thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a case of you switch off the nervous system, switch off the brain to get them to move without thinking.
So if they've got a hamstring injury and that injury has been agonizing for them, you need to get that injury to a state before they can.
That is the final piece of the puzzle in terms of the end range. But in terms of all that else, it's a gradual build up. It's a range of movement. It's a strength through all the movement as well. So it's like, if you have a player who has checked all these boxes and they're still missing that one thing, usually it's a bridge of the gap between end stage rehab and return to play.
Right.
And in that would go extreme dynamic movements and forcing them to not think about the movement, just to do it without.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it goes back to the end range. If you can maximize the end range, that in their game they're only using 60% of the end range, that 60% becomes effortless. You know, I don't expect someone to go into a full front split dive when you're doing a football movement, but you expect them to have some sort of mobility, so when they go for a tackle, there's not this idea that, oh, what happens if I hurt myself after an injury? So yeah, I agree with that.
So yeah, and then I wouldn't use passive at the end. As you said, I would use it throughout.
Yes.
And especially the early stages. The early phases is literally, can we get the full range of movement back? Then can we load that range of movement? Then can we be that dynamic in the range of movement? So I probably use it more start to mid. Then hopefully by the midpoint there, I should be comfortable to get into that range of movement, and then that's when the dynamic bit picks up again. To get them to return to play.
Yeah, I agree with that. The final point with this, because obviously it's going to end up being a long podcast. Maybe it's part two.
I think part 2 is needed.
Yeah, there's so many different aspects of this, but the final part of this, and it's probably going to be a cliffhanger because we'll leave it for the next one.
Oh, it's long,
Still recording, is. So we talked about lengthening, right? Everyone's talking about lengthening all of a sudden. You know, the knees over toes guy talking about lengthening of the hamstrings and the hip flexors. It's great. You know, that's a big part of it. Is anyone talking about compressing? Why do we need compression in the body?
Because let's take the row for example. In order for us to lengthen our lower back, we must compress and shorten here. And like you said, if there's a block here, we can't actually lengthen the back as well. So it's that antagonistic pairs of the way the muscles are working together. Yeah. And how would you best force someone to contract or get them in those contractile positions? Let's say there is no barrier now of the lengthening. The only barrier now is in, let's say, the shortening. What would you normally use?
If a person can't contract fully, so let's use the abs as the most common thing. People do crunches, right? And they want to be aesthetically good with their abs. It's going to tie into what we're saying, but just remember what our main topic was, which was about the
how do we get someone to contract?
Yeah, so we don't go off on a tangent and never come back. But I had a guy a few years ago that he always said to me, like, why do you have all 8 of your abs showing? And I said, there's a couple of things. Genetics is one of them. The second part is how much tension am I holding in the abs? So if my abs can lengthen this much, I can contract it this much. His abs were tight that his lengthening was here. So when he contracted, he was only here. So he wasn't even shortening. So if you think about a spring, you get a spring in your hand or a slinky, and you squeeze it. If the spring itself is in bad condition, so you left it outside in the rain, it's become, a bit more worn away, rusty, and you squeeze it, it's not going to go down so easy, and it's going to be harder to get it right to the end. It might not even get to the end, it'll just snap. If you get a nicely fresh spring, come out of the metal workshop, and you squeeze it, you should be able to squeeze it and get it right to a point. The only barrier now is how strong you can squeeze it down. Now, if the spring can come back out to its original position, then you've done well. But over time, that spring doesn't fully come out. It just gets stuck at that range. And that's basically this guy's abs. So I said to him, you need to lengthen that muscle, break the tissue down, so then you can contract it harder. Then you'll be able to work on the other set of your abs. So it just won't be those 4 abs that you're working on all the time. There'll be the top set and the lower set as well. And also hip flexor is a big part of that. Hip flexor, obliques, if those are tight, then you're not fully contracting the entire core, as we call it. So that's my approach would be, if someone didn't want to do mobility separately, those bossy balls, get them to do something that's beyond the natural range of motion. So if we do an ab crunch on the ground is a limiting factor there. So you have something that goes beyond the limiting factor.
Like ab roll.
Yes. So you go further back, which means that you're technically in that end range. You're going beyond that normal standard end range because the ground is no longer your limit. So now you're working on that mobility part of it. So you're lengthening it and then you're also shortening it. That's my approach to it. What would you say your approach is?
Similar, to be fair. If I'm looking at lengthening and the limiting factor is the shortening, then I would focus on the relaxation of the initial part, but also lengthening and breaking it down as well through the movement.
Right.
So whenever it is, let's say it's a hamstring, I'll also be looking at the hips and like how well that can actually move into there. Sometimes it's even the actually the rib cage dynamics as well below here, which sort of limits the hip flexion into there. So sort of just figuring out what's stopping the compression going and then just targeting it accordingly.
Yeah. And the one thing about compression is, I used to think I was, going back to the Bosu ball example, I used to think I was strong because I used to lift the entire plate, the cable machine, the last stack. I think I was on the second to last or last stack at one point and doing ab crunches. Then about 6 months down the line, I met a girl that was doing handstands in the gym, and I spoke to her, and she was doing some compression exercise at the end of her session, and she was just able to lift her legs effortlessly off the ground when she was doing pike raises and then hanging leg raises. She was really strong there. And I thought, this should be super easy for me because I can do the whole stack. I did it, my legs were barely getting to 90 degrees, and I was done by 2 or 3 reps. And I spoke to her and I was like, it doesn't make sense, like I can do the entire stack.
You've only been working on the top half?
Well, it's just the fact that it's also a movement pattern thing. Your body becomes good at what movement pattern you're using. If we're just using the top half of the abs, but we're not even actually
using hip flexors.
And it's hip flexors. People don't understand that for a lot of people is very tight. To compress the hip flexor, to bring the leg fully straight, your thigh over towards your face, that movement is completely unknown for 90% of the population in the West. It's when you start to go to a gymnastics place and you watch the kids do it, or someone says to you, we need to work on your compression, that you start to realize how weak those muscles are. And if you think about running and you're dynamically switching directions, when you're hurting yourself, it's that zone which usually, because of the weakness in there and a lack of strength there, that's what's caused the initial problem in the quad or hamstrings, etc., which has caused the injury. So that's something we should probably go into in the future.
Yeah.
Right, wrap
Good
it up there.
stuff.
Episode 1.
Episode 1, let's
Done.
go.
We need to find the subtitle for this thing anyway. What are we going to call it? Introduction to...
intro to injuries, I guess. Innit?
Yeah, cool. Right, we're done, guys.
Right,